Frank Beard was the only member of a band known for their gritty Texas flair and long beards without a beard. However, don't be fooled by its straightforward appearance. He has been the constant pulse underlying ZZ Top's distinctive sound for more than 50 years. One of America's longest-running and most unique rock bands. Frank is not the type of artist who chases attention or press. He doesn't exploit his notoriety as a promotional tool, and he hardly ever performs lengthy interviews. However, you've heard him in every firm steady drum beat if you've ever listened to Grange, Sharp-Dressed Man or Tush. Simple yet definitely necessary. The voyage of Frank Beard's life is both peculiar and amazing. From playing drums in pub bands in Texas to going on sold-out tours abroad. From a serious drug problem to a representation of resiliency and healing. From remaining concealed behind his drum equipment to becoming a vital member of a band that will never be replaced. In a world of music that is always changing, and where celebrity has the power to take everything away, what kept Frank Beard going? It's more than simply a drum narrative. It is the tale of a man who never quit playing, but instead chose to remain silent. Childhood. Born in the small Texas town of Frankston on June 11, 1949, Frank Lee Beard was the son of a middle-class American family in the suburbs, where life went slowly but sufficiently to instill in a young child a love of sound and rhythm. The Beard family was not particularly wealthy or artistically inclined. As long as it was genuine and effort-driven, they always encouraged their son to pursue his passions. Frank grew up in a secure educational setting. He went to Irving High School in Irving, Texas, which was rapidly developing in the years following World War II. Frank did not excel academically, but he soon gained the respect of his professors and friends for his quiet, collected and tenacious demeanor, particularly when the topic of music was up. At a very young age, he developed a liking for drums by tapping his palms in time with music on the family radio. Classmates said that he tried making rhythms with anything he could find, such as tin cans and school desks. Frank was captivated by beat and tempo, in contrast to most guys of his generation who were interested in vehicles or sports. It was more than a fleeting interest. Over time, it became to be the most significant aspect of his youth. Frank started playing in local bands in his early high school years. He played drums for tiny bands such as the Hustlers, the Warlocks, the Cellar Dwellers, and later American Blues, where he met Dusty Hill, his longtime musical collaborator and future co-founder of ZZ Top. In Texas communities, their early shows were typically held in garages, underground clubs, or tiny pubs. Venues with only a few hundred patrons, but they were just as passionate as any large stage. Frank Beard's childhood was devoid of significant disruptions or abrupt turning points, but it was precisely this steady pace of life, his intense passion for percussion, and those early rough-around-the-edges gigs that subtly set him up for a long journey in which he would become an indispensable member of one of America's most recognizable bands. Early career Frank Beard's journey from a local drummer to a professional musician occurred in the late 1960s. He started looking for more serious opportunities in the quickly expanding Texas music scene after performing with bands like the Warlocks and American Blues. One phase that was really odd and contentious was when Dusty Hill and Frank started a band called the Zombies, mimicking the well-known British band. Although they had no real members of the original band, they used that name to tour across several U.S. states. Frank learned how to act under pressure and honed his stage talents from the event, despite their later admission that it was foolish and embarrassing. Following this time, a crucial meeting altered everything. Billy Gibbons, a musician who had recently left the Moving Sidewalks, was searching for a drummer for his new band in 1969. Gibbons met Frank Beard through a common connection, and Beard suggested his friend Dusty Hill to play bass. The iconic ZZ Top lineup, Billy Gibbons on guitar and vocals, Dusty Hill on bass, and Frank Beard on drums, was formed as a result of that encounter. Later that year in Texas, the name ZZ Top made its stage debut. Frank was the group's youngest member at the time, only 20 years old. However, he assumed the crucial responsibility of providing the band's rhythmic anchor. He has a wealth of experience playing in clubs and on unofficial tours, and he soon established himself as the band's rock for all of its creative experiments. Frank was more than just the drummer in those early years. He also contributed to the development of the band's distinctive hard rock boogie and blues sound. Soon it would be recognizable as ZZ Top. When ZZ Top's first record was published in 1971, it marked the official beginning of Beard and the band's more than 50-year musical adventure. Frank Beard was rarely a public speaker, but he set one thing up right away. Even though he didn't stand at the microphone, he was always the one behind the machine keeping track of time, and it was that consistent beat that enabled ZZ Top to endure their most difficult years and develop into a genuine American rock legend. Career success. No one could have imagined that the three-man Texas band ZZ Top would become one of the most enduring icons of American rock when their debut album was released in 1971. With a raw blues rock sound that embodied the essence of the South and featured Frank's controlled yet accurate drumming, ZZ Top was still a relatively unknown name at the time. Despite being the group's quietest member, he was constantly following the beat. Tres Hombres, their third album released in 1973, marked the beginning of their success. They crossed the Texas border and became well known nationwide thanks to the hit song Grange. The song had straightforward lyrics and a repetitious riff, but Frank's drumming was excellent, hypnotic and steady. Everything was kept together by it. With Grange, ZZ Top gained recognition as a band that could make people nod their heads with every beat, in addition to being a funny band with a distinctive sound. In the years that followed, Beard continued to play a key role in the band's lengthy U.S. tours. Beard remained faithful to his job as Gibbons and Hill added effects and guitar solos to their sound, the rock-solid foundation. He was unique in that he never pursued ostentatious methods. Like a Texan traversing the desert, Frank played the drums, dead-on yet not swerving or hurrying, and the band was able to experiment creatively without ever losing their identity because to that stability. But the 1980s were the years that really made ZZ Top a global sensation. The band changed their approach with Eliminator, 1983, using synthesizers, adopting MTV-ready images and penning songs for a younger demographic. Many established rock bands found it difficult to update, but ZZ Top achieved it with ease and great success. In fact, Frank was the first member of the group to recognize the explosive potential of MTV. "This channel plays music videos all the time," he remarked over the phone to Gibbons. "You should turn it on." That call brought ZZ Top into the world of music television. Videos like Sharp-Dressed Man Legs and Gimme All Your Lovin', featuring classic coupes, flashy girls, and two long-bearded men moving in slow motion under neon lights, became iconic. And Frank, he was the only one without a long beard. But he was also the only one who didn't have to change a thing, because his rhythm was already perfect. Eliminator sold over 10 million copies in the US alone, and made ZZ Top one of the best-selling rock bands on the planet. Follow-up albums like Afterburner, 1985, and Recycler, 1990, continued the momentum, accompanied by global tours. Frank never missed a show. Despite the toll of past substance abuse, he showed up, sat behind his kit, and kept time like a watchful soldier amid a storm of sound. ZZ Top's success wasn't just commercial. They became a blueprint for a kind of rock with personality, music that didn't try to be overly complex or take itself too seriously. And within that style, Frank Beard's steady, unshowy drumming was the backbone. In 2004, when the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Frank didn't say much, but his presence from the very first album to the height of their glory said more than any thank you speech could. Fans may not remember his name first, but anyone who has ever listened to a ZZ Top song has heard Frank Beard, whether they realized it or not. Crisis and Tragedy. The massive success of ZZ Top in the 1970s and early 1980s brought more than just fame and fortune. It also came with the hidden temptations that often lurked behind the spotlight. For Frank Beard, the quiet figure in the background who rarely drew media attention, that isolation, coupled with the relentless rhythm of touring, paved the way for a long descent into darkness. In 1977, ZZ Top embarked on one of the biggest tours of their career up to that point. Each member earned about $72,000, an enormous amount for a rock artist at the time. But in a rare interview, Frank later admitted, "I blew every cent of it on drugs, not a penny left. It started with LSD, then cocaine, but it didn't stop there." Frank turned to heroin, which he once called a vacation for the mind. Drugs became his constant companion in the studio, backstage, in hotel rooms and on the tour bus. Didn't lose his technical ability, but he began losing himself. Fans had no idea, but within the band, things were getting tense. Beard became erratic, easily unhinged, and would often go missing before shows. Recording sessions dragged on twice as long as scheduled. There were times he'd fall asleep right in the rehearsal room, even as guitars wailed around him. Eventually the road led to a 12-step recovery program, where Frank had to make a choice: either get clean or walk away from everything he had built with ZZ Top. By late 1979, the band quietly announced an indefinite hiatus. No official reason was given, but the truth was that Frank had entered rehab. The next 3 years would become one of the quietest periods in ZZ Top's history, and the darkest for Frank Beard personally. He disappeared from the public eye, no new music was released, and he severed all ties with the music world. But in that silence, a rebirth began. Frank committed himself step by step to getting clean, not just to save his career, but to save his life. After leaving rehab, he began regular therapy, focused on his health, and returned to drumming from scratch, as if he'd never known fame. In 1981, ZZ Top re-emerged. When Eliminator was released 2 years later, many assumed the band had simply updated their image and sound to keep up with the times. But behind that reinvention was a deeper truth. Frank Beard had survived, and he didn't just return. He reclaimed his place, continuing to drum on every album, every tour, and every live performance for the next 4 decades. Not every artist can make it back from heavy addiction and stand under the stage lights without losing who they are. But Frank Beard did, not with declarations or applause seeking. He did it by keeping the beat, silent, steady and precise, as if nothing had ever broken. Personal life: amid constant touring, stage lights and commercial success, Frank Beard chose a quiet and private life, almost entirely opposite to the image most people associate with a rock musician. He was first married in the late 1970s, but that marriage ended quietly, and received little media attention. It wasn't until 1982, just after completing rehab and preparing for his return to ZZ Top, that Frank remarried, this time to Debbie Meredith, a woman from outside the entertainment industry. When Frank met Debbie, he was at one of the lowest points in his life, fresh out of rehab, struggling to find his footing in music again, and still dealing with the emotional fallout of addiction. Everything was uncertain then: his career, his health, even his state of mind. But Debbie, unaffected by fame, grounded and steady, entered his life with a calmness and resilience that proved vital. They married in 1982, just before ZZ Top entered its most commercially successful era with Eliminator. 1983. It wasn't a high-profile wedding splashed across music magazines, nor did it come with glamorous photo shoots. But for Frank it was a new beginning. The first time he had a partner who didn't ask about tour dates or parties, but instead cared about what he ate, whether he'd slept well, and how he was really feeling that day. Frank and Debbie had 3 children together. During the band's global tours, he made a conscious choice to stay detached from the entertainment world whenever he was off stage. The family lived on a spacious ranch in Richmond, Texas, where Frank spent most of his time tending to the land, playing golf and caring for pets. With his children, he placed no pressure or expectations to follow in his musical footsteps. He only wanted to give them what he never had growing up: stability and a constant family presence. Unlike his more public-facing bandmates, Billy Gibbons and Dusty Hill, who often appeared on TV shows, at fashion events, and in media interviews, Frank Beard never chased publicity. He didn't write memoirs, produce documentaries, or give long interviews. The few insights into his personal life usually came second-hand, from relatives or brief mentions in articles about ZZ Top. Notably, he was the only member of the group who didn't grow a long beard, a detail often brought up jokingly by fans, but which also accurately reflected Frank's personality. He went against the trend when it didn't feel right, and never needed outward symbols to prove who he was. In 2002, during a tour in Paris, Frank was suddenly struck with acute appendicitis, and had to undergo emergency surgery. It was one of the rare occasions when he missed a show, and he was temporarily replaced by John Douglas, his longtime drum technician. After the operation, Frank returned to the band within weeks as if nothing had happened. It was a small incident, but it reinforced his image as the quiet, irreplaceable force behind the scenes. Throughout more than 50 years of performing, he's never been publicly involved in conflicts with colleagues, never embroiled in moral scandals, and never considered a source of instability within the band. In an industry marked by chaos, Frank's quiet endurance may be the rarest quality a rock musician can maintain. Frank Beard doesn't live to be seen, he lives to keep playing, and within that silence lies a whole world of family discipline and deliberate choices, the kind of world that many others in the spotlight lost long ago. Legacy and influence. Frank Beard is not the kind of drummer who appears on magazine covers, nor does he often make the lists of technical legends debated among drum enthusiasts. But one truth is undeniable. Without Frank Beard, ZZ Top wouldn't have lasted beyond a single album. For over 50 years he has been the only member who never left the band, not even briefly. On every recording, every tour, every music video, Frank was there, never loud, never stealing the spotlight, but always the one keeping time for everything else. Frank didn't play drums to perform. He played to serve the band. His drumming wasn't about speed or flashy technique. It was about stability, adaptability, and a perfect match with ZZ Top's musical identity. A gritty, blues-infused rock that didn't need to flex to be compelling. He knew exactly what was necessary and what was excessive for each song. His style, focusing on groove rather than showmanship, influenced an entire generation of Southern rock drummers. Many younger musicians have credited Beard with teaching them how to play for the band, not for the ego. In an era when American rock often favored explosive solos, Frank stood as proof of the power of restraint. His legacy is also inseparable from ZZ Top as a cultural phenomenon. From their breakout era with Tres Hombres through the MTV boom of Eliminator and into the years following Dusty Hill's death, Frank has always symbolized continuity. He is the thread connecting generations of fans, the same man who played for bell-bottomed crowds in 1974 and later kept the beat for audiences wearing sharp-dressed man t-shirts in 2019. In 2004, when ZZ Top was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Frank stood beside Gibbons and Hill in a legendary frame. He didn't give a long speech, he didn't try to be inspirational, but everyone understood. If those two were the face and voice of ZZ Top, Frank was the heart keeping everything from falling apart. In an industry where egos often lead to breakups, lawsuits, or lineup changes, Frank Beard proved something simple yet valuable. Endurance and loyalty are also forms of legacy, and in his case, it's a legacy that will never be forgotten. Current life. At 75, Frank Beard is no longer the young drummer from the dusty stages of Texas, but he remains an inseparable part of ZZ Top, the band he helped build, kept in rhythm, and stood beside for more than half a century. In early 2024, Frank joined ZZ Top on a co-headlining tour with Leonard Skynyrd called Sharp-Dressed Simple Man. The tour lasted over a year, and despite his age, Beard showed up for every performance without missing a single show. He no longer moved with the agility of his younger years, but his drumming remained solid and precise, as if time hadn't touched it. However, in early 2025, ZZ Top unexpectedly announced that Frank would temporarily step away from the Elevation Tour due to medical reasons. Initial reports stated he needed a procedure on his leg, possibly related to the ankle or ligaments, but no official statement was released by Frank himself. Drum technician John Douglas, who had previously filled in during emergencies, was brought in for the spring tour dates. Frank's absence, even for just 2 months, raised concern among fans. In over 50 years, he had never left the band for health reasons, but by late May 2025, Frank Beard returned to the stage as if he had never left. With his familiar quiet demeanor, focused eyes behind the drum kit, he offered just one brief sentence to the audience. "It's good to be back, see you out there." It wasn't a declaration, it was a message. He was still here, still keeping time, and still didn't need many words to prove his presence. Off stage, Frank continues to live with his wife Debbie on their ranch in Richmond, Texas, the same place he chose as a refuge during his recovery from addiction in the 1980s, and now a peaceful sanctuary in his later years. He has no social media, makes no public statements, and doesn't attend entertainment events. All connections to the outside world are kept to a minimum, just as he has lived his entire career, quietly with discipline and unwavering focus. What's remarkable is that even with fewer appearances, Frank remains a full member and living symbol of ZZ Top. Those who saw him perform Grange in 1973 could still watch him play Sharp-Dressed Man in 2025, with the same unshowy, yet strangely unshakable rhythm. In an industry where everything moves fast, from musical trends to artists' life cycles, Frank Beard represents something rare: endurance and loyalty to one's core role. Not everyone survives long in rock, even fewer do so without losing their identity. At 76, Frank has no need to reinvent himself, because what he has done in silence is still echoing on stage every night. Frank Beard's story isn't one of reaching for the spotlight, it's a story of preservation, of keeping time, keeping stability, and keeping the identity of a band intact for over half a century. He never needed flashy titles, nor did he seek the center of the stage, but it's precisely that quiet endurance, that refusal to leave his post, that makes Frank Beard an irreplaceable part of American rock history. If you believe that artists like Frank Beard, silent yet essential, deserve to be remembered and appreciated, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next stories. When was the last time you saw ZZ Top live? What's the one song where you remember Frank's beat the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes a single familiar drum hit is enough to bring back an entire era. See you in the next videos, where we keep telling the stories of those who weren't loud but helped shape the sound of a generation.